Okay, so now that we're finished with the midterm, here's a reminder that your second primary source analysis is due on Monday. So, this one I am not giving you primary sources for. You need to find your own. As the topic of this one is poverty, this shouldn't be extraordinarily difficult. Depending on which textbook you're using, you should have primary sources in the back. And given that we just did industrialization, that is a big part of where poverty comes from. That's a big part of where the whole idea of the emergence of things like socialism and communism come from. Is this, I won't say sudden, because poverty's pretty much always existed, but now it's a much more noticeable thing. So you can go to Google and type in primary source in quotation marks, and then maybe industrialization and poverty, and come up with some things. You can go through Galileo at the Kaufman Library. You can also go to, as some of you should have noticed with the first primary source analysis where I gave you your sources, you can go to the Internet History Source Book. And there's even a section specifically in there on industrialization, and it will give you some. You need a minimum of 3 of those. Remember, they are eyewitness accounts. This is not an article or an essay written about poverty. It is instead a an actual someone living at the time period talking about being poor and what it's like. And there are literally a lot of them out there. All right. And again, as I said, if you actually have if you got Strayer and Nelson with sources, or you got von Sivers with sources, or you got Bentley with sources, at the end of the chapter on industrialization, there should be some talking about that. All right. So before we actually get to the questions, bear in mind, if you're still having a hard time figuring out what it is, there's a very good video linked here in the instructions telling you. Also, if you haven't watched these videos yet, I encourage you to do so. What is historical thinking, bias in primary sources, how to analyze primary sources. These are very, very good videos. There's also this excellent source that you need to use, the standard of living in Europe during the Industrial Revolution, because it's going to bring to you again this idea we've been talking about what standard of living means, and also how things changed during the Industrial Revolution. So this will work really well with this discussion of poverty and what it means. All right, so in your source list, your works cited at the end of your paper, you should have your textbook itself, the essay here that I just mentioned, Standard of Living, your 3 primary sources, and Frankopan and Harari, and what they discuss in their chapters that you've already been assigned about how the Industrial Revolution changes everything, right? So you're going to have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sources in your works cited. Okay, 7 sources. The actual questions then are, using your textbook, Frankopan and Harari, the essay above, and 3 different primary sources, discuss the history of poverty. Now, notice that the history of poverty, as I said to you, poverty has already existed. So you're going to go back to discussing what the concept of poverty was in the 1500s and how it changes as we get to the Industrial Revolution, right? What is it? Which means you're going to have to go to one of these sources to get a definition of what poverty is. How does it become an issue during the Industrial Revolution? As in, how and why does suddenly this issue change? How is it related to imperialism, something we've kind of discussed already in the discussion on imperialism, to nationalism? And nationalism is reasonably new by the 1800s. This idea of the creation of nation is a different construction. It's different from monarchy, even though it overlaps with monarchy in this period. It's something that really emerges out of Western Europe. So be sure you think about that. How is poverty related to socialism, communism, and Marxism? And all 3 of those are byproducts of the Industrial Revolution. They are byproducts of nationalism, and they are definitely related to poverty, right? How and why does it become a political issue? And you might think about that and think about it in terms of how things work today when we talk about economics and political parties and how the economy is at the root of pretty much every election in a democratic society. Be sure you think about that. Why is it still an issue today? Again, going back to what I just asked. And how is it a reflection of historiography? And remember, historiography is how the way we tell the story of history changes from generation to generation. So how does poverty change the nature of how we view history? How do we see poverty today? How does the bias of your primary sources reflect the way poverty was viewed in the past? And how have we changed that view, or have we? Right? All right. Citation mandatory, of course, as always. Um, if you need a refresher on what historiography is, these are some really good videos on what it is and how, especially with this one, the learning the social sciences, how can history change? Well, history itself doesn't change. It's just our interpretation of history that changes. So think about that. All right. If you have any questions, email me. If you are uncertain about what your primary sources are, my apologies, email them to me no later than Saturday, and I will look at them between Saturday and Sunday and get them back to you. I actually encourage you to do that because it's often very difficult. But again, go to the Internet History Source Books, look for um, things like uh, industrialization, look for imperialism, look for those sections and see what they talk about in the way of how people lived and how the average, again, that average person lived and how their standard of living goes down because of industrialization. All right, if you have any questions, let me know.